Welcome to Mystic Radio with Robin Alexis. I'm super excited to have you join us here because it is October, and October, as many of you know, is Breast Awareness Month. And I am so excited to be in the 20th season of Mystic Radio with my very special new friend and best-selling author, Ken Sylvester. He wrote the book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof. And for those of you who don't know, he has dedicated 65% of the proceeds of the sales of his book to cancer research in honor of his beloved daughter. And for many of you who listen to Mystic Radio or who followed my work for decades, you know one of my skill sets is that I am a medium. So imagine and that I lost a daughter, right? And so imagine how extraordinary it was for me when I was guided to buy Ken Sylvester's book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof. And in the very beginning, he talks about his daughter. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, this man and I are connected because we have had visitations since childhood with extraterrestrials and seen spaceships. But we also have this very deep and profound sharing of being parents who have lost a child. And in this case, we know Amber lost her life to breast cancer, and how amazing that her father is dedicating 65% of the proceeds of his book, We're Not Alone, and Here's the Proof, to cancer research. Now, you can find Ken's book on Amazon by putting in his name, Ken Sylvester, We're Not Alone. And you will also find my book, which is A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. Now, both of us are running a special right now. Ken's book is only $7.95. And so when you do some research on our books on Amazon and you find Ken's book, just know that he's lowered the price to make it especially interesting for you. If you even double thinking yourself about being interested in the subject, know that you are helping to heal breast cancer by having him donate to breast cancer research. And I'm just in awe of Ken. So Ken, welcome to Mystic Radio.
Yeah, I thank you very much for that introduction, and I welcome you also, Robin. Today, as I had promised, the episode is going to be on another school landing that happened in 1966, and it happened in Melbourne, Australia. In fact, it's the largest and most famous UFO sighting and landing in Australian history, and it occurred on April 6 in 1966 with over 200 eyewitnesses, and it was fairly noticed by the press. This UFO is one of the greatest cover-up stories in UFO history, and this is how it all happened and began. Around 11 a.m. at Westall High School in Melbourne, 3 silver disc-shaped UFOs were seen hovering over the schoolyard. Their presence was definitely noticed by all the students and everyone else out on the playground. A couple of them ran inside to report they were seeing flying saucers. There were over 200 students, staff members, and other witnesses who all shared the same experience. They saw 3 UFOs, and one of them had briefly landed. The first one over there was Jacqueline Argent, who, along with another student and friend, Tanya, had climbed over a fence into the area known as the Grange Reserve. When Tanya got too close, she became very scared. She turned around, hopped over the fence, ran over to where a crowd of students were, and then she fainted. And she was taken by ambulance to the hospital. However, Jacqueline still was at the landing site of the spacecraft, and she witnessed it taking off. It only landed briefly, and described it just like the others described it. The craft moved vertically about 20 feet, tilted sideways, and then took off at supersonic speed. And as told in the observables, there were no trail and no sonic boom. It also had left a circle where the UFO had landed, and the weight had bent down the grass. There was also 3 smaller circles from the landing gear that had left an impression, and you could see. John Williams was a first responder with the fire department. He saw the landing, and he saw that the grass had not been mowed yet. A second witness to the grass being bent down was a Colin Kelly. He was near the playground playing football. After the UFO took off, he ran over to the area, and he saw the grass was all bent down where the craft had landed. Shortly after, he did witness that they mowed the grass, and it was in a small field. It was erased, and of course it erased all the evidence. And found out later it was ordered by the military to do that. In fact, the military showed up within 20 minutes. This is a huge staff. There was over 20 military guys. The police, the fire department had arrived, and they were joined by someone from the Department of Defense in Australia, and the alleged military thugs that I refer to as the Men in Black, they had arrived in force. They immediately made sure everybody knew that all they had seen was a weather balloon, as they talked to everybody. A teacher, Andrew Greenwood, had taken pictures of the UFO and the landing site. The military took his camera, and it was never seen again. The Men in Black told him if he talked about his photos or the UFO, he would be fired and would be reported to the school board as drunk on duty. The witnesses were not allowed to talk to the media. Channel 9, a local TV station, tried to interview them, but they were cut off by the large armed military presence. The media were told to leave immediately. Through threats and intimidation, the military presence allowed no one to report anything or any was happening. No reports were filed at all. The military managed to intimidate and scare off all the witnesses. The school's headmaster, Frank Zembelby, he called a school assembly. He told the students they were suffering from mass hysteria. He told them that they had only seen a weather balloon and not to talk to the media or anyone else. Those students who did will get detention if they talk to anyone about today's event. One student, Joy Clark, had only spoke to the media briefly, a couple minutes, but she was the first to get in detention. He wanted to set an example. Another student was overheard talking back and forth. He was an art student named Victor Zachary, and he was an art student, and he was convinced by the head schoolmaster that if he talked, it could jeopardize his future career in art. Jacqueline went to Tanya's house the next day after the incident. They were good friends for many years, and she had been going to Tanya's house. But when she knocked on the door, it was answered by an English-speaking couple, but they were not Tanya's parents. And the couple said they did not know any Tanya, and nobody by that name had ever lived there. Now we're up to 2006, and Victor Zachary finally is going to get a chance to tell his story. And he tells it to Bill Chalker, who is a UFO researcher who wrote a book called The Oz Files. When he found Tanya, she was not able to tell the researcher anything, claiming she just doesn't remember. Now we're going to fast forward 44 years. The witnesses finally got to tell their full story. On June 4th, 2010, Shane Ryan and Rose Jones, a UFO researcher, did a documentary. Here are their stories. They all concluded there were definitely 3 UFOs that were silver, disc-shaped, each with a dome on top and silent. The 3 crafts hovered, then one decided to land. Phil Turney saw all 3 UFOs. When Sue Savage got close to the landing area, she saw the one craft take off after it moved vertically about 20 feet, turned sideways, and then sped off at supersonic speed. She was in shock. Sean Matthews, who also got close to the landing site, he saw purple lights on the bottom. After the UFO took off, he could see the landing gear and that the grass was smashed down as if a heavy weight had crushed it. According to Studio 10, this was Australia's most famous UFO sighting. It had been over 50 years since they interviewed some of the key witnesses. Joy Clark was in science class when the students came in yelling, "There are flying saucers out in the Grange." She ran outside and was able to see the 3 flying saucers. She had kept this secret for 50 years, until finally in 2016, Des Carroll broke the story in the Dandenong Journal. She interviewed many witnesses, including the teacher, Andrew Greenwood. Andrew had kept his secret for 50 years. He was still scared, but ready to talk. He told the reporter he saw 5 jets chasing the UFOs. He thought they were playing games because they were running circles around the jets. He also said the military took his camera and he never got it back. He was visited again by the men in black shortly after that day. Shortly after that time, I should say, he allegedly committed suicide.
Oh.
Another UFO researcher, a Dr. McDonald, and also a scientist, tried to reopen the case. So he went to the archives and found the file. It was empty. No report, no camera from the teacher. It was gone. The film canister from Channel 9 was there, but empty. No film inside and no kind of written report. Dr. McDonald was not happy, and all the evidence was gone. So he criticized and complained to the Australian government, but they just ignored him. They wanted to continue the cover-up. So he gets to testify to the United States Congress. However, they ridiculed him. In fact, his first question they asked was, "So you think these kids saw flying saucers and little green men?" They made fun of him, destroying his career, his reputation, his credibility, and his career. It ruined him. Shortly after, he allegedly committed suicide also. Add that to your list of biological side effects. The New York Post did a story on August 7, 2018, but it coverage was slanted to support the many cover-up stories that had been put out by the military. All the explanations were theories that claimed the original story was a hoax. The first explanation was that with over 200 kids, the event produced mass hysteria. Next, government documents claimed it was a project called Hubble, which was a joint venture between the United States and Australia to measure radiation in the air. Using silver balloons that carry tracking equipment, the documents stated the tests were conducted between 1960 and 1969. The 5 jets that reported chasing the UFO were simply light aircraft following the weather balloons via radio signals. When the mission was complete, a parachute was supposed to bring the balloons and tracking equipment back to Earth. They claimed that was what the students had seen. Nothing but a weather balloon. Same story as Roswell, where they also said it was a weather balloon, and they called it Project Mogul instead. You think since Roswell, they could have gotten a little more creative in their writing. They should have hired a writer to do it. To add credibility to the story, James Fox, who has made documentaries on UFOs and is considered an expert on UFO research, made a documentary on the events in Melbourne. Fox, in 2021 episode on Netflix, presented some new evidence that had never been seen before. He interviewed and showed a photo taken by James Kibble, a UFO researcher. The photo was very clear. You could see the UFO, as described by over the 200 witnesses, was the same alien craft. Fox also interviewed many of the witnesses from the day of the landing, which had happened over 50 years ago. Most of the witnesses were in high school during that time. Now they all were adults and senior citizens. Their stories and their descriptions of the UFOs had not changed. They all matched their original stories. Fox had also done the interviews at Zimbabwe, another school we talked about earlier. Both cases resolved around a landing near a school site. The results were much the same. Hundreds of students had witnessed the landing, but all were forced to keep the secret for 50 years. They were telling the same story to him that day as they had when they were in school. Fox was convinced that they all were telling the truth. But the cover-up of this landing started just 20 minutes after the landing, with armed camouflage military had arrived. They jumped out of their Jeeps and trucks and went to work. First, they stopped the interview by Channel 9 with Joy Clark, a student, had just started talking to the media when she was cut off. The military made all the media leave immediately. The men in black also talked to all the students and teachers and staff and any other witnesses, advising them all not to talk about anything they had seen. Yet 50 years later, as I have just said in this story, and you'll read in my book, eyewitnesses have given credible testimony that matched their original stories. Their stories didn't change. These witnesses felt compelled to let the public know the truth. Why not tell the public? We're not admitting that the spacecraft was alien, but it was a true UFO, unidentified flying object. This is why I continue to use the term UFO, because the government and the military and scientists, despite pictures and overwhelming evidence, still cannot identify what the flying spacecraft are. Hence, they are still unidentified flying objects. The military are now calling them UAPs, which is the unidentified aerial phenomenon. Even scientists are unable to think outside the box, and it's because they keep trying to apply our laws of physics. They are being labeled and categorized using the 6 observables to identify the UFOs that cannot be made by us or our adversaries. If that is true, it leaves only one choice. They are alien. The other major clue, providing they can't be made by us, is the speed and maneuverability made by these spaceships. Humans could not stand the G-force created by these actions. As Robin has told you all in the beginning of our podcast many times, that this is an experience, not an explanation. It's up to you to decide what rings true. Sometimes you may want to research yourself to get a great experience. While doing research, I suggest you take in something visual. YouTube has podcasts, documentaries, videos, and pictures done by researchers and reporters. The visual, you get to see the faces of these witnesses and hear them speak. This is much more convincing than just, of course, reading the book or listening to our podcast or just reading an article on the internet. Now, if you like to research this story, I suggest the 2021 documentary on Melbourne on Netflix by James Fox. We will post a link to a couple of the sites of my other sources. Now, something new that we're going to start today, and I don't know how often it will happen, but from time to time, I'm able to obtain new information. While preparing for each podcast, I review my information and sources. When I do, sometimes I notice new information posted. When that occurs, I will add it to a future podcast to keep our listeners up to date. And today I have 2 updates. When reviewing the information for today's podcast, I found one that was just posted 2 days ago, and I did that research about a week ago, so it's about 9 days old. So today I'm going to bring you some new information on 2 of the previous stories. In the beginning of the book, I did a story about my first sighting when I was a teenager back in 1966. In my earlier podcast, I was unable to provide the name of the pilot that I found had chased that UFO from that day. Well, again, in doing my research, I came across a video that showed on that day in 1966, Selfridge Air Force Base received about 30 calls from people claiming they were seeing UFOs. Also, NORAD radar from the Battle Creek, Michigan, picked up the UFO on their radar. Within 5 minutes, the Air Force dispatched an F-106 interceptor. The pilot was Captain Gary Carroll. His co-pilot was Bob Nicholson. NORAD had picked up the UFO at 35,000 feet. So Captain Gary Garrett climbed to 35,000 feet. He couldn't find it. So he dropped down to 20,000 feet, still no visual. He was covering a large area and using a zigzag pattern to try and find the UFO. So then he finally dropped down to 10,000 feet, still no visual. So he gets down to around 1,000 feet. Finally, he spots it out of his window. Using their radar, they tried to lock on the UFO. They slowed down because the UFO had slowed down to 300 miles per hour. Still, he's unable to get a lock on it. So he tries to sneak up on it because it's now stationary, just hovering. He now has a visual. He describes the UFO as football shaped. Suddenly, the UFO makes a sharp right turn and speeds off at supersonic speed and disappears. Captain Gary Carroll is considered one of our best pilots. He says, "This is a non-human spaceship. No human could survive the G-force created by these maneuvers." Captain Gary Carroll was an experienced pilot, flying the interceptor F-106. The F-106 is capable of speeds of 1,400 miles per hour. Captain Gary Carroll retires a full bird colonel. He had kept the secret for 55 years. He was dying of cancer and felt compelled to tell the truth. Shortly after his confession, he died of cancer in 2021. Colonel Gary Carroll died a hero. He is the highest ranking officer to ever admit to a UFO story. He left behind a drawing he made of that day. The drawing matched that of the witnesses. He was telling the truth.
And this was seen just before you and your friend saw the ship that you write about in your book.
That is correct. So
this
I found
is astounding
of the book because at that time I had the only reported story in the newspaper, and I called in directly to the newspaper to get the story in. The other witnesses didn't, and nothing ever else was printed in the newspaper, and this went on for like I say, 55 years until this guy confessed. Now, I got one more update for you, and this is on Roswell, and this was one that was recently posted 2 days ago. The Defense Minister of Canada at the time was Paul Heller. He had access to documents filled both with some truth and some disinformation that he got from our military. He was told that there were indeed 2 ships that had crashed. However, he was led to believe the 2 ships that crashed were disc-shaped crafts, but these 2 crafts were made by the Russians, known then as the Soviet Union. These saucers were deployed by ex-Nazi scientists and Russian scientists from World War II and were not alien technology. For national security reasons, we did not want the Russians to know we had acquired alien technology. Also posted on that same site, a guy named Glenn Dennis claimed he was a mortician and sent to Roswell to prep the bodies to be put in a deep freeze. There were 3 dead aliens. While sitting down having lunch, he was approached by a friend of his who was extremely scared and worried somebody might hear what she was about to tell him. She was a nurse there. She told Glenn that she was asked by 2 doctors to assist them. She was taken to a private room. When one doctor opened the door to the room, she was overwhelmed by this most horrible smell she had ever encountered. These 2 doctors were doing autopsies on the dead aliens from the crash at Corona. They told her this must be kept secret and not to tell anyone. They needed her help because the smell was so overwhelming. They all had to leave the room on occasion and take a break. So they took turns walking in and out of the room.
You know what? We are getting towards the end of the show, so can we wrap this up and then start our next show, Ken, discussing this?
Yeah, I have just about 30 seconds more.
Okay, perfect.
The conversation between Glenn and Nurse was filmed and recorded. The voice analysis was subject to a lie detector. It was confirmed she was telling the truth. To further confirm the truth, in that same video, a leading UFO researcher, Ray Santelli, totally debunked the weather balloon story.
Yeah, I would think so.
Update on Roswell.
Oh my gosh, this is just jaw-dropping research that you've been doing and saving a lot of us a lot of time. For people who do want to do your own research and you want to find out what Ken is doing, you can go to our Facebook page, A Second Conversation with Extraterrestrials. That's where Ken and I are launching this podcast and the book series that we are doing together. So, wow, this has just been an amazing show. Thank you so much, Ken. And again, when you purchase his book on Amazon, We're Not Alone, and here's the proof by Ken Sylvester, it is going to assist in helping with cancer research. As I mentioned at the beginning of his show, his exquisite
yes, Robin,
daughter...
we're going to, we're going to donate 65% of the profits from the book towards cancer research.
Yes, and you even lowered the price.
Yes, to make it affordable, actually I cut it down to $7.95 only. You can buy an early Christmas gift also for someone and know that they'll be contributing to help fight cancer.
Yes, it's very, very beautiful. And my book is called A Conversation with Extraterrestrials by Robin Alexis. Our best-selling books are on Amazon. And next show, I'd kind of like to go over some of the things we've been talking about, and I'd also like to talk to some of these extraterrestrials, because one of the things I was hearing while you were talking today is that these different extraterrestrial groups aren't under like one umbrella, right? So some of them coming and learning about our planet, they don't know about the other ones coming and learning about our planets. Or when they do find out, they may have their own issues. So that was really interesting for me to hear in my mind while you were talking about the denial globally of the existence of extraterrestrials. So Ken, thank you very much for today's show. And everyone stay safe. And if you are female, honor your breath. Thank you for listening.